Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The air was heavy, charged with something unspoken. I remember clutching my legs close, almost defensively, though deep down I knew it was more than that. His eyes found mine across the quiet room, steady, dark, filled with the kind of focus that made my breath falter for a beat too long. A man in his 40s, confident without even trying, he carried himself like someone who already knew the effect he had on me. The light from the window spilled across his shoulders, tracing the lines of his shirt, and I felt that familiar warmth rise inside me. I tried to shift, to look away, but the air seemed too thick to move through, and when our eyes locked again, the silence between us said more than words ever could. It was just a second, but it lasted long enough to unravel me. He moved closer, not much, just a lean, a tilt that shortened the space between us. I caught the faintest brush of his shoulder against mine, and the warmth spread like a secret I wasn't ready to admit. My fingers tightened, pressing against my skin as if to anchor myself. The small gesture didn't escape him. I saw it in the way his lips parted slightly, like he was holding back words that might break the delicate balance. Every detail became louder, the sound of his breathing, steady but deliberate, the way my own chest rose and fell too quickly, betraying me. I could feel the pull of something dangerous, the kind of temptation that makes your stomach twist in both fear and longing. My body leaned before my mind allowed it, closing that gap inch by inch until the world outside this room no longer existed. He whispered something, low, measured, and my pulse stumbled. My legs shifted in response, instinctive, unplanned, and his eyes followed the movement like it was the only thing that mattered. I could feel the gravity of the moment, as if the slightest push would send us tumbling past the point of no return. And then it stopped. Just short of crossing, hanging in the fragile space between what we wanted and what we knew would change everything. His hand shifted on the arm of the chair, fingers grazing against mine in a way that felt too precise to be an accident. I froze, but the warmth of his skin lingered long after the contact broke, a pulse of heat that spread up my arm. My breath caught, and I knew he felt it, because when I dared to glance up, his eyes weren't on my face anymore. They flicked down, briefly, to my lips. The tension grew heavier, like a rope pulling tighter between us. I tried to steady myself, tried to laugh it off with a soft sound that came out more like a nervous sigh. His mouth curved slightly, not a full smile, more like he had the upper hand and knew it. That subtle shift, that quiet power he held, only made me ache more. He leaned back, just enough to make me miss the heat of him, and the absence stung. My body betrayed me by tilting forward, closing the gap again, as though gravity itself had chosen sides. His knuckles brushed against my leg this time, a slower, lingering touch that made my skin prickle with awareness. My chest rose faster, air suddenly hard to hold inside me. Jealousy flickered in the back of my mind, memories of women who might have felt that same touch, who might have leaned in the same way. The thought burned, twisting into something sharper, and I realized how dangerous this really was. He must have seen it cross my face, because his hand pressed firmer against me, claiming more space, as though to remind me I wasn't the one in control here. Every small movement became amplified, the soft scrape of his thumb against my skin, the low exhale that stirred the air between us, the way his gaze kept drifting back to my mouth like he was weighing a choice he shouldn't make. My body responded without permission, shifting closer until the line between accident and intention blurred beyond recognition. And then, something shifted. A sound, a movement outside the room, startling us both. But instead of pulling away, he reached for me instinctively, his arm brushing against mine, tugging me closer than before. We were suddenly face to face, breath against breath, the tension coiled so tightly it could snap at any second. The moment held, dangerous, electric, right before everything was about to break. The space between us felt like a trap, one we had both walked into willingly. Every time I thought I could breathe again, something small pulled me closer, the brush of his sleeve, the tilt of his head, the heat radiating from his skin. It was magnetic, impossible to ignore, and yet a quiet voice inside me screamed of consequences I couldn't afford. He leaned in just enough that his breath skimmed the edge of my ear, a whisper of warmth that made my stomach tighten. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he murmured, his voice low, edged with challenge. The words weren't a warning, they were a test. My pulse quickened, my lips parted, but I forced myself to turn my face away, even as every part of me wanted to lean into him. The retreat didn't last long. His fingertips found the back of my hand, barely a touch, tracing the skin as if mapping out boundaries he intended to break. I shivered at the contact, my heart pounding hard enough I was sure he could hear it. Pull away. That would have been the smart choice. Instead, I stayed frozen, caught in the dangerous sweetness of the moment. He noticed. His smile was small, deliberate, and the way his eyes lingered made it clear he knew exactly what power he held. But then, almost cruelly, he withdrew. His hand slipped back, leaving me cold, aching for the heat I had just lost. My chest tightened, and I hated the hollow space he left behind. That hollow turned into something sharper, jealousy creeping back into my veins. I shifted closer again, testing him this time. My shoulder brushed against his, deliberately slow, lingering longer than necessary. His breath caught, barely audible, but enough to tell me he wasn't immune. He turned his head, so close now I could see the faint stubble along his jaw, could feel the warmth of him hovering inches away. Neither of us moved to close the gap, and yet it felt like any second, everything would spill over. And then, without warning, he moved, a sudden, bold step forward that erased the distance, leaving me no space to run. His hand caught my wrist, firm but not forceful, holding me there in the silence. The next second would change everything. His grip on my wrist wasn't tight, but it was unshakable, like an anchor holding me in place. I could feel the pulse of his heartbeat against my skin, steady, deliberate, while mine thundered recklessly in my chest. The silence around us thickened, the kind that makes every sound too loud, his breath, my breath, the quiet creak of the floor when I shifted closer without even realizing it. The air felt different now, charged like a storm just before lightning strikes. He didn't move right away. Instead, he studied me, eyes tracing over my face as if memorizing every reaction. That slow patience was almost worse than anything else, because it made me ache for what he wasn't doing yet. When he finally leaned in, it wasn't sudden, it was a slow drawl of movement, each inch collapsing the fragile distance we had been fighting to preserve. His lips stopped just short of mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath washing over me, stealing the rhythm from my lungs. My own lips parted, not from choice but from instinct, and the tiny pause between us felt like its own confession. He let his hand wander higher, from my wrist to the curve of my arm, fingers brushing lightly as though testing how much of me he could touch without breaking the unspoken rule. I shivered beneath that soft trail, caught between leaning in and pulling away. He knew it, too. I saw the glint of triumph in his eyes as his thumb lingered a second too long against my skin. Then came the whisper. Barely audible, meant only for me. "Tell me to stop." The words weren't commanding, they were playful, teasing, daring me to prove I had more control than he did. But I couldn't. My throat tightened, no words would come, only the quickened rush of breath betraying me. His lips hovered, brushing so close they almost touched, and the world seemed to narrow into that single point of tension. I leaned forward, just enough that the promise of contact trembled on the edge of reality. And then, something shifted. A sharp sound in the hallway, footsteps echoing toward the door. His eyes snapped to mine, still locked in that dangerous closeness, the choice dangling between us. One more second, and everything would break. The footsteps faded before the door opened, leaving us suspended in silence. My chest rose and fell too quickly, the air thick with everything we almost did and didn't. His hand loosened on my arm, but he didn't move away. If anything, he lingered closer, the corner of his mouth lifting as though he found amusement in the way I struggled to breathe. "You look disappointed," he teased, his voice husky, meant to sting and soothe at the same time. I tried to answer, but he didn't wait. He stepped back finally, giving me just enough space to miss him. Then, in one smooth motion, he reached for the bottle on the table, poured a drink, and slid it toward me. The glass clinked softly, his fingers brushing mine as he let it go. "Here. You look like you need it." I wrapped my hand around the glass, more for the excuse to hold on to something than for the drink itself. He poured one for himself, eyes never leaving mine, and the simple act felt loaded, like we were sharing more than alcohol. When I lifted it to my lips, he did the same, and for a moment it felt like a ritual, a toast to a secret neither of us would speak. The drink burned, but not as much as the way his gaze lingered. When I set my glass down, he moved closer again, this time not stopping at my wrist or arm. His hand rested against my waist, a touch that carried no explanation, no excuse. My body stiffened, then melted all at once, traitorous in its honesty. "Still quiet," he murmured, leaning down so close that his words skimmed against my skin. "Maybe you're afraid of what you'll say." I should have stepped away, should have drawn a line, but instead I laughed, a soft, shaky sound that only gave him more to work with. His eyes glimmered, catching the light, and then he moved in another step, the heat of him pressing close enough that I could feel the outline of his chest against mine. That was when the twist came, another voice from across the room, playful, calling his name. Someone else had entered, and I didn't have to look to know it was someone who had no idea what they had just walked in on. His hand tightened on my waist, subtle but firm, as if daring me to pull away. Jealousy spiked hard and fast. The voice lingered in the background, asking him something casual, harmless, but the way he didn't let go of me told a different story. He smirked down at me, lips close enough that I could feel his breath against mine again, daring me to show if I cared. The moment burned hotter than before, fueled by competition and the threat of being caught. I leaned forward, almost against my will, closing the last inches between us until it felt inevitable. His lips tilted toward mine, danger, desire, inevitability, and then, everything stopped. The voice in the background faded as quickly as it had come, the blurred figure retreating, leaving us alone once more. But the damage was done, the jealousy, the tension, the sharp reminder that someone could walk in at any moment only made the air between us heavier. His hand remained firm on my waist, not moving, not letting go, as if he wanted to make sure I understood the choice we had both been circling. I turned toward him, close enough now that I could feel the warmth of his chest against mine, the heat radiating through the thin barrier of fabric. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even move his lips any closer. Instead, he leaned his forehead down against mine, the gentlest touch imaginable, yet it sent a rush through me stronger than any embrace. My breath caught in my throat, and when I finally let it out, it trembled between us. The whisper came next, soft enough that I almost thought I had imagined it. "I can't stop thinking about you." The confession cut through me, raw, undeniable, leaving me with no place to hide. My hand lifted on its own, fingers pressing lightly against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat, steady, powerful, a rhythm that betrayed how calm he wanted to seem. His eyes locked on mine, searching, daring me to say something back. And I almost did. Almost. My lips parted, my breath brushing against his mouth, so close it felt like we had already crossed the line. My hand slid upward, stopping at the base of his neck, holding him there as though the smallest shift might end everything. But just as the moment threatened to break open, he pulled back, not far, just enough to whisper something that changed the ground beneath my feet. "You're not the only one who feels this." His voice carried weight, implication, a dangerous truth I hadn't been ready to hear. The air between us pulsed with what he wasn't saying. Who else knew? Who else was tangled in this? The intimacy, the closeness, it didn't fade, but it twisted, turned sharper, threaded now with questions I wasn't ready to ask. His hand pressed more firmly at my waist, pulling me impossibly closer. My forehead remained against his, our breaths still tangled, and yet everything had shifted. Desire burned, restraint faltered, and with this new truth between us, I realized nothing about this was safe anymore. His words still rang in my ears, "You're not the only one who feels this." The confession hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, yet strangely comforting. My heart thudded in my chest, but instead of pushing him away, I let myself sink into the closeness, forehead still pressed against his, breathing in sync. For a long moment, neither of us moved. It was as if the world outside no longer mattered. The temptation to close the last inch between us was unbearable, yet somehow, restraint became its own form of intimacy. His hand stayed firm on my waist, grounding me, while my palm lingered against his chest, feeling the steady beat that betrayed the calm expression on his face. Finally, he pulled me into him, not with a kiss, but with an embrace. His arms wrapped around me, warm, steady, holding me as though he'd been waiting for this longer than he'd ever admit. My body pressed against his, my head resting against his shoulder, and for the first time, the storm quieted. The hug was soft, lingering, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid. When he finally eased back, his eyes found mine again. The smirk was gone, replaced with something softer, gentler, something that almost scared me more than the fire from before. He didn't need to speak, the way he looked at me said enough. This wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you give to end a moment. It was the kind that carried secrets, promises, and the dangerous knowledge that what had happened between us couldn't be undone. My fingers trailed briefly against his arm before I stepped back, creating space again, but only on the surface. Inside, that closeness still burned. As I turned toward the door, the air felt different. He hadn't kissed me. We hadn't crossed the line. Yet somehow, it felt as though we already had. His eyes followed me, and I knew when I looked back over my shoulder that I'd find him still watching. I did. And the look he gave me in that final moment said everything words couldn't: "This isn't over." And just like that, the story looped back to the beginning. I had been holding my legs then, shielding myself, unsure. Now, I walked away changed, carrying the weight of his touch, his words, his presence. The tension hadn't broken, it had only deepened, promising more. The door closed softly behind me, but my heart stayed in that room.